Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to The Quality Hub, chatting with ISO experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis. Today I'm here with Stephanie Dawson, Human Resource Manager, and Suzanne Weber-Smatko, Manager of Consulting Services, both from CORE. Glad you both could be here today.
Thanks, X.
Thank you.
Well, we're really glad to have you both here. This week's podcast is going to be the first in a two-part series on competence and training in ISO 9001, or Clause 7.2. This week will be on competence, but before we dig into that, let's first learn a little bit about our guests, Stephanie and Suzanne. Let's start with Steph. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been in HR for almost 10 years, and I'm currently the HR manager here at CORE.
Okay.
So before CORE, most of my experience was in the healthcare industry, in various administrative positions. But what I love is when I joined CORE, I remember we had 12 employees, and it's 8 years later, and we've over tripled our employee count. So we've definitely had to hone in on hiring competent and qualified people.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I started, which would have been 6 years ago, it was like we have just taken off.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. We could all fit around that long table for our meetings, and now it's like,
yep, no way.
There's no way, even with our big conference room, we could fit everybody in there. So, well, that's really cool. Now, Suzanne, you're an oldie on the show, so.
Thanks, X.
What about you? Anything new?
No. But rather than rehash the 30 plus years of experience I've had in aerospace, I think I'll talk a little bit about the experience that I've had relative to the topic today.
Okay.
So I've held a couple of management positions where I have been responsible for hiring people, vetting people, engaging employees, training employees, and just, really just making sure that they have the competence to perform their job duties as successfully as they can.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, we do appreciate you both being here. And we're just trying to take an interesting approach here where we're not just talking about the topic and the actual clause, which I'm going to read here in a second, but we sort of have somebody who does it with Stephanie and how she handles that and how these kind of two relate. So that hopefully will be interesting to our listeners. Well, let's get started. And I'm going to start by reading Clause 7.2, and it states, the organization shall determine the necessary competence of persons doing work under its control that affect the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system. B, ensure these persons are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, or experience. C, where applicable, take actions to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. And D, retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. Now, that's a whole lot. Now, that's not as bad as other clauses in the standard that we've read. But can you give us a little bit about what that might entail?
As you said, this clause requires companies to ensure that all their personnel who perform work affecting the product that they are providing or the services that they're providing are competent, and this basically revolves around, if you don't have competent people doing product quality or service quality,
right,
it ultimately impacts your customer.
Mm-hmm.
So the key requirements of the clause is definitely identifying the necessary competencies for personnel performing work, ensuring that personnel are aware of how important that they contribute to their activities relative to the quality management system, also known as your objectives, provide training, take action to achieve necessary competence in personnel. And I'm sure Steph will get into, how you do that. Maintaining records of the training, for sure. You definitely need to
document
maintain
what you've done.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Take credit for it.
And, not only perform the training or identify the training, but what's really important is evaluating the effectiveness. I think people underestimate evaluating the effectiveness of the training to make sure that your employees are, again, successful or performing the duties to the point where they can, that the quality of work is good.
Yep. And spoiler, part 2 of this is when we're going to be talking about training and how that competence and how to gauge it and stuff like that. Well, that's a good place to start. Now, Steph, from your perspective as the HR manager, how do you look at this?
Okay, so at CORE, we have various processes that we follow to achieve all of this. So some things that we do would be performance reviews, regular meetings between managers and employees, as well as maintaining proper documentation, not only of performance discussions, but also including things like the actual job description, which helps break down our competence requirements for each position.
Okay. So with that in mind, how do you determine the competence level for our employees, even from the beginning on?
So we start with our job descriptions.
Okay.
For each position, we've defined what someone needs to be successful in the position. For us, there were 4 main categories of competencies: intellectual, personal, interpersonal, and motivational.
Okay.
But theoretically, these categories could vary possibly from company to company.
Probably based on what the job's going to be, and
Right.
what you do as a company.
Right. But within these categories, we get even more specific. So we identify specific skills that we desire for that position to have. It's really important to think about the position as a whole and not just a specific person when you're building out the job descriptions.
Okay.
So when we're defining them, we determine what are considered what you might call deal breakers and what skills can be taught. So, for example, if someone desires a competency of intelligence for their position, that would be a deal breaker.
Okay.
You can't teach someone or train someone to be able to be a quick study or increase their ability to understand and absorb information.
Okay.
But a competency of maybe decision-making skills, that would be more of a teachable competency. You can help train someone to be able to make more rational and objective decisions over time through coaching and mentoring.
Okay.
So competence is then reviewed biannually through performance reviews between the employee and the manager. The nice thing about having these competencies defined and written down is we can use these skills and abilities to help create specific interview questions. So we can then vet appropriately during interviews for what we're specifically seeking in a candidate.
Okay. So basically, that's probably going to be, I would assume, when you're going back and you're looking at the criteria for a position that you're going to hire for, you kind of want to look at the individual that you're going to hire and say, okay, in this position, they're going to need these duties, and that kind of takes more of this than that.
Right.
And these are deal breakers, these aren't.
Right.
Things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can form different interview questions, behavioral interview questions, and things like that around the competencies. So then you can figure out if that person kind of fits what you're looking for.
Gotcha. Now, you did mention biannual performance reviews. So with that in mind, can you address the ongoing evaluation of personnel competence within our organization?
Sure. For newly hired employees, we do the usual 30, 60, 90-day reviews. And we have specific outcomes or goals defined that we would like that employee to work toward in that time frame.
Okay.
At the end of each review period, the manager meets with the employee, they discuss the employee's progress and how comfortable they feel in their role, and the outcomes or goals, they're adjusted based on that conversation.
So these reviews kind of evaluate the competency, but also kind of adjust once you get a feel for the employee, as it were. This is some person's got strong suits here. You're going to look at it on a scale. I'm assuming, everybody's going to have good or bad points, and they might be really strong here. This might be a little bit weaker.
Right. So then you adjust your goals based on where they may need more help and guidance.
Gotcha.
And maybe they're really strong somewhere, so you don't have to have such strong goals in that because they're good on it.
Gotcha.
But for evaluating our established employees, it's a very similar process, but the goals are typically longer term. They're usually set a maximum every 6 months with a review at the end of that time during what's traditionally referred to as a performance review. That's what everybody is most familiar with, that term.
Right.
But managers, at least at core, are encouraged to follow up in between just to make sure everything's on track. Support and follow-up really are the keys to success to help any employee grow in any competency or goal that you might set.
Yep, absolutely. So, Suzanne, how does that fit in line with what Clause 7.2 says?
Well, I think that, it ensures that you are identifying, again, the competencies that you need. You hire based on the competencies that you need. And then you are providing guidance or coaching. Employees bring a certain competency, right? Based on what you define. And then every company has their own set of training.
Right. And it's going to be specific to role in some cases too.
Right. And it's going to be specific to a role. So we've identified the competencies that we need. You perform the training, you document the training, and you maintain records of that training. And then you measure the effectiveness of the training, which is what Steph said. In your 30, 60, 90 day, during that time, you're evaluating an employee to make sure that you can adjust to make sure that they deliver what require of them or what your expectation is.
Yep. And like I said before, we'll be covering the actual training aspect and how we can build that to tailor people learn in different ways, how we can get that to work best for everybody in next week's podcast.
One additional note that I will make is that the standard does require leadership. Mm-hmm. Leadership does have the responsibility to make sure that their employees have what they need to be successful. Mm-hmm. It's not just hire them and see how they go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, if they fail at it, nobody wants to put the time and resources into hiring somebody and watch them fail at it.
Right.
So
I think there's some expectancy on that from the employee as well. If you're getting hired, you expect, I'm going into a new place that I've not worked at before. They need to let me know what I need to do and help me train me that way as well. So I think it's not just on the leadership to do it for the company, but it's also expected by the employee.
Yeah. But the important note is also that leadership is responsible to make sure that employees are successful. And if they're successful, your business is successful ultimately.
Absolutely. So now we talked a little bit about it with Stephanie, but from a Clause 7.2 perspective, what role do performance reviews and feedback mechanisms play in fulfilling requirements of that 7.2 clause?
Well, basically, you're going to identify areas where personnel are not meeting the necessary competency requirements. This can be done by comparing their performance to established performance standards, job requirements, and the results of their performance evaluations. I'll give you an example. It kind of goes hand in hand with reviewing the effectiveness of the training and leadership's responsibility that I spoke of before. In my manufacturing experience, you have a bunch of manufacturer employees, people, operations working. And everybody always, if something went wrong, you had a nonconformance or a major problem, the first thing that people want to do is point the finger at someone.
Yeah.
My philosophy has always been, don't ever, ever blame the operator. Mm-hmm. You need to dig down into a deeper root cause.
Yeah.
Because it could it could be because they didn't have the right training.
Right.
It's not necessarily not the right skill set.
Right.
But your onboarding process or your things that you train on, you might actually learn something that you need to perform additional training.
Yep.
So get into the root cause if employees are not performing well, because it's 99% of the time it's not the person.
Well, and it also, if you do look specifically at the individual and let's say you fire them and hire somebody else, you're setting yourself up for potentially the same failure again if it really is a training issue and you haven't gotten to the root cause of what the real problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've actually been into a pretty substantial wrongful termination case. Mm-hmm. And this gets on into the documentation part of training. Mm-hmm. But if we didn't have the training records that we needed, people don't come to work and say they don't want to do a good job.
Right.
But that 1%, sometimes it is the employee, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't have the training records that we had or maintained of employing that training over and over again. Mm-hmm. Then it would have, the company would have been at a loss.
Right.
But we won the case based on the training.
Yep.
And
so in that case, you proved it.
So people don't come to work saying, I'm going to do a bad job today.
No.
99%
of the people don't. And then you have the one person that phones it in.
Yeah.
So Steph, can you go into detail on how we do that at CORE when it comes to more from the performance review and the documentation and the actual training itself?
Yeah. I mean, to Suzanne's point, the documentation is so important. I can't tell you how many times I preach to my managers, document that, because it's very easy to have a conversation and not write it down. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to regret it later if you need it. So it's a very important part of, not even just talking about ISO, just operating a business in general. So it's really important.
We do look at it like, just forget it's ISO and this is really just best practices for your business.
Yeah.
And that's really what ISO's doing.
Yep. But CORE specifically, part of how we do this is with our performance reviews. Mm-hmm. So they're essentially a tool for guidance and support for each employee within CORE. We use them to facilitate discussions between the manager and employees about what's working, what's not working. And we have questions specifically around what training or development needs the employee foresees in the next 6 months, as well as questions like what can their manager do to help them more. It's more about how to help the employee grow and develop. than just concentrating on what they're doing wrong and what they need to improve. So we want it to be a true discussion with both the manager and the employee.
And that really helps gaining it from buy-in from the individual as well as you're figuring it out. And it's almost more of a mentor coaching approach, and then add training once you both see that there's a need here.
Right. So it's a really collaborative atmosphere between the manager and the employee. We've also made a very conscious decision to separate the discussion of pay increases and performance reviews.
Okay.
There's an entirely separate time and meeting for discussion of an annual pay increase. We find that taking pay out of the equation for a performance review really allows the employee to concentrate more on the valuable discussion between themselves and their manager rather than anxiously, waiting to hear how much the raise is going to be and then having the results of that conversation potentially affect the rest of the meeting.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So all goals and performance reviews are documented in our HRIS, and that both the employees and the manager have access. So they can both keep notes and update goals as they go. So neither one needs to wait for the next review to see how much progress someone's making.
Yep. And I know when I did my first review many years ago here, that was really, it took me back a little bit where it's like, this is a different approach. I need to answer, say what my manager does good and what they might be able to help me on.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh,
it really
am I
makes
allowed
you
to do
think.
that? Yeah. And but you get, there's a phrase that I've heard called, you get change in your pocket where you value each other, and there's an honesty when you trust that person and they trust you, you can be a little more authentic and say, could you help me out here a little bit more? And the manager's not like, oh, well, I'm your manager, I'm just going to do it's a back and forth, and it really, it's almost a holistic perspective.
Yeah. At core, no one's above feedback.
Yep.
So we really believe that. So feedback is all around, and you can, if you have it, give it, and everybody receives it really well.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really a good idea. Now, Suzanne, what other aspects of competence does 7.2 address?
I would say we touched on this a little before. Analyze the cause of competency deficiencies. Don't jump to conclusions. It may require to do some root cause analysis and identify some improvements that you need to make, and standardize across your business.
Right.
And then one important point that I want to make is, Steph, I think it aligns with what you mentioned about feedback, is consult supervisors and other experts within the organization, or my biggest thing is engaging employees. When you have a training deficiency, they might actually be the ones to identify the improvement that you need to make. So for example, I worked with a business where manufacturing engineers wrote work instructions, and they expected people to come in and follow the work instructions. And again, when the nonconformances occurred, they wanted to blame an operator. Well,
what a great way to put a wedge between everything.
Well, because everybody learns differently. Yeah. Right. Some people will read a work instruction and be fine. Some people are hands-on. Some people are good at watching videos. You've got to take that all into consideration. And what I determined the root cause was that you really don't have the feedback from the employees. They couldn't follow the work instructions because you had another set, a skill set writing the work instructions. You had another person doing it.
Yeah. Well, and you also don't have that buy-in that we've talked about so much where I'm doing the job. Here's a weak point. This is where it fails. This is where we have problems.
Yes.
This is where things aren't happening on time. And you got to be open on the top end, like you said, with feedback, and no one's above feedback.
Yeah.
Hey, this isn't really addressing this need. But if you put that where you're going to do it the way I say in there, and you don't really have any say or feedback on it, I'm above reproach. You have to do it the way I wrote it. You put that wedge in there where you can't have that honesty of what might actually fix the problem and be better for everybody.
We actually wound up putting teams together that for a new product introduction where we would have the employees engaged in that new product introduction process so that they can help write the work instructions because they had the know-how on the floor.
Yeah,
they were the ones that made the company hum.
Yep.
Right. So, and they were the ones that were going to make the quality product. Right. So,
yeah.
The other thing, let's take it back a minute, is the clause also covers the competencies of persons doing work under the organization's control to be addressed, and make sure that you have records relating to that agency or contract worker, maybe specifically targeted as their they're often a weak point. So make sure that under the organization's control also applies to anything that might be outsourced. So you may hire somebody, a subcontractor that still needs to have your specific training.
Yeah.
Or help to understand your business goals or expectations.
Maybe like maybe like an IT MSP.
Absolutely.
Where, well, we need our computers to work a specific way because of XYZ. Well, we don't really, the antivirus you put on there blocks what we need to do. Well, there needs to be some training of this.
So don't forget that also any competencies of persons doing work under the organization's control is important as well. So make sure you think about that. I mean, that also relates to another portion of the standard, which is 8.4, and how you control your vendors or your contractors. So there's more requirements that fall under 8.4, but that's how it relates to 7.2.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. It's really been insightful. Steph, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I suppose really the key is to have defined and clear expectations really of what competency means, starting from the job itself and then moving into each individual. So if it's clearly documented and communicated and the message and feedback is delivered in a consistent and open manner, it can really cultivate a very growth-centric and collaborative environment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have anything you'd like to add too, Suzanne?
No, I think we've just about covered everything.
Oh, that's great. This is wonderful. Well, ladies, it's been a great time talking with you today, and I really want to thank you for being here.
Wait, maybe I do have something.
Uh-oh.
Again, back to the basics. Plan, do, check, act.
Oh, absolutely.
Plan what you need, what your training is. Do it.
Yep.
Check it. And then act upon what you've learned.
Yep. Oh, we're good to go, or we need to revisit this.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Don't forget. Keep it simple.
I wonder if somebody ever wrote that into like some kind of instructions or something.
I don't know.
An ISA or something.
I don't know.
Lots of good information for our listeners. Really appreciate you being here. And thanks again so much.
Oh, yeah. It was great to be here.
Awesome.
Always a pleasure, X.
Absolutely. And we want to thank you for listening to our podcast today. We hope it's been informative for you. And just a reminder that we have part 2 of this series that will be discussing the training aspect of Clause 7.2 next week. Now, if you're looking for more information about Core Business Solutions and how we can help you with ISO certification, cybersecurity, or even customized training, please email us at info@thecoresolution.com, or you can visit our website at www.thecoresolution.com. And if you haven't already followed us on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, be sure to do so. That way you won't miss the next Quality Hub podcast when it's released next week. Have a great day, everyone.